Yeah, useless. Absolutely useless.
Any answers anywhere? I mean, this car, they're trying to get this car in a better position for you.
The team has no problem. You've seen the car's on pole, so we probably need to change driver.
Those were the words of Lewis Hamilton after qualifying for the Hungarian Grand Prix. The words of a 7-time world champion, the man who has dominated Formula One, broken every record that there is to be broken, won 7 championships, taken 105 victories, and yet he looked a broken man. Someone that no matter what he tries, nothing works. No answers can be found. He always seems to find a dead end wherever he turns. 2025 was supposed to be the year that we saw Lewis rediscover his mojo, the excitement of a new challenge in driving for the greatest name of all, Ferrari. But we all expected would re-energise him, get that fire burning in his belly once more, and bring back those glory days where he would just run rings around his competition and make winning look just effortless, so easy. But it's been anything but that. If anything, it has confirmed his supporters' worst fears that he may be past his best. We may never see Lewis Hamilton actually fight for the World Championship, that record-breaking 8th World Championship that he craves so much, and yet it may not come at all. We know that Hamilton does not back down easy no matter what the challenge that he faces. He's always looking to prove his critics wrong. But there's no escaping the fact that he is in a difficult place right now, and it's going to be very difficult to get out of it. It's that bad going into the summer break that really at this stage of the season you've got to ask the question, is this Lewis Hamilton's worst season in Formula One in his career? Or is there light at the end of the tunnel? Well, let's talk about it. Looking at the season as a whole, it really hasn't been pretty for Lewis. I mean, the obvious stat that jumps out at you is the fact that after 14 races, Lewis is yet to score a podium finish, which is quite something. This is the longest he's ever gone through a season at this stage of the campaign where he hasn't stood on the podium at least once. And it's worse than that actually, because his last podium finish was at the end of 2024 for Mercedes at the Vegas Grand Prix. So he's now actually gone 16 races without standing on the rostrum. But aside from that, what is also not great is the fact that he's been beaten comprehensively by Charles Leclerc, his teammate, which I think some people probably did expect. Charles is obviously one of the top drivers on the grid. He's a lot younger than Lewis. I think there's about a 12-year age gap. And Charles is at that stage of his career where he is now going into his sort of peak period. And in qualifying, he's currently 10-4 ahead of Lewis, and he's finished ahead of him in 11 of the 14 Grand Prix. So those are the obvious negatives, but let's take a look at some of the positives. And the obvious positive that jumps out was Lewis's sprint victory back in China, which obviously was unexpected at the time, but it was a fantastic performance. You know, he put it on pole for the sprint and then led the race pretty comfortably, I've got to say. It was like watching the Lewis of old. Then the other positive is that he's been very consistent in terms of his points finishes, even if, okay, he hasn't, as I say, he hasn't had that top 3 finish. He has finished in the points at all but 2 of the races. The 2 races where he didn't score were obviously China, where he was disqualified. He did finish in the points that day, but he was disqualified for plank wear. And then the last race in Hungary, he obviously finished 12th. So how does 2025 compare to other previous seasons where Lewis has struggled? And you've got to say the 2 that really jump out are 2022 and 2024. I know some of you will probably say 2009, but looking back, he actually scored 2 victories that season in 4 pole positions. So I don't think that can be classed now as one of his worst seasons. Let's start with 2022, because this arguably could be classed as his worst season to date, because this was the first time that Lewis went through a whole campaign without scoring a victory or a pole position. It was a very big surprise. We didn't see it coming, even if we expected the Mercedes dominance to end in the first year of the new regulations, but we still expected Mercedes to be competitive to some degree, and Lewis would still be able to compete and win races, and yet here he was, unable to stand on the top step of the podium. He also finished behind his teammate George Russell in the standings, which at that point was only the 3rd time in his career that he'd been beaten by a teammate over a season, the others being Jenson Button in 2011 and Nico Rosberg in 2016. But even though Russell finished ahead in the standings, Lewis did beat him in the qualifying head-to-head 13-9, and he did score 9 podiums. And then you have 2024, which on the positive spin did see Lewis return to the top step of the podium. He ended his win drought that went on for almost 1,000 days when he won the British Grand Prix, and he followed that up with another victory at the Belgian Grand Prix, albeit courtesy of his teammate being disqualified, but nevertheless he was back to winning ways. But the season as a whole really was a struggle, because he finished a lowly 7th in the championship, which was the worst finish he'd ever recorded in his career. And on top of that, you've got to say he was beaten pretty convincingly by Russell over the campaign. Not just in the respect that, again, Russell finished ahead in the standings, but if you look at the qualifying head-to-head, Lewis only qualified ahead of George on 5 occasions out of the 24 races, which even though Russell is a good qualifier himself, we didn't think he'd be that far ahead of Lewis in terms of the head-to-head battle. And those difficulties in qualifying have carried over into this year. Lewis again looks as though he's really struggling to show his raw pace over one lap that we've seen so many times over his career. It's known to everyone that he is one of, if not the greatest qualifier that Formula One has ever seen. 105 pole positions, that's almost 40 more than the next best. But time and time again, we always see Lewis so disheartened, so despondent after qualifying. And that was the same in Hungary. He came on the radio after being knocked out in Q2 and said every time, which was him revealing later on that he was at fault for the poor performance. It wasn't nothing to do with the car, there was no issue. He just simply wasn't quick enough. You have to wonder if age is now a factor. Lewis is 40 years old. He's one of the oldest drivers on the grid. And I think it is. It's natural that every sportsman or sportswoman, they get to a certain age and their performance just begins to drop off. And I found it interesting that Anthony Davidson, the Sky F1 pundit, spoke about this on the F1 show. Speaking about Lewis's difficulties, Davidson said, "He's never been the same since the 2022 regulations came along. He's had to work harder than ever to rework his style. I don't mind saying it because it's the elephant in the room. Age is a factor. I've lived and breathed it as an athlete. You start asking yourself questions. It's only natural." Now, Davidson is more than qualified to speak about Lewis's struggles because he's been there, he's been through it, so he knows exactly what he's going through. But people will say that if we're talking about age being a factor in Lewis's career, what about Fernando Alonso? Well, if we're to compare both Lewis and Fernando, I would say that Fernando has just turned 44, hasn't shown as clear a drop-off in performance that Lewis has. I still think that Fernando is actually operating at a high level. I don't think he's actually declined as much as Lewis has. I go back to that quote that Fernando said a few years ago where he said, "I may not be perfect in every area, whether it's qualifying, racecraft, overtaking and so on, but I'm at least 9 out of 10 in every area." And I still think that that's relevant today. I still think Fernando is driving 9 out of 10 in most, if not all, areas. The only thing that is letting Fernando down now is arguably his body. He obviously sat out FP1 in Hungary because of a back injury, so maybe there are now signs of his body just starting to give up on him. But going back to Lewis, again, you've got to mention the qualifying struggles that he's had the last couple of years. He's really missing that raw pace now, and that is the obvious area where he's struggling more than others. And I suppose we're speaking about that more than other areas because Lewis having the record for most pole positions in F1 history, there is a high expectation for him to still be delivering. But the fact of the matter is he hasn't qualified in the top 3 all season long. And more than that, it's not just about the fact that he can't put it all together. He's making uncharacteristic mistakes. If you look at Spa, for example, he had a very difficult weekend altogether. In both the sprint qualifying session and then the main qualifying session for the Grand Prix, he was knocked out in the first part of qualifying, and both of those were down to mistakes from him. But what could also be hurting Hamilton's form is the current regulations. We've had ground effect cars since the beginning of 2022, but it is obvious that he hasn't really gelled well with the current generation of cars. So it's possible that this also may be a factor in why Lewis is currently struggling. So maybe 2026 could offer him a lifeline with the new regulations that are incoming. The cars will obviously be narrower, we won't have DRS, ground effect will disappear. So maybe it will go more in line with what he likes from a car and we'll see the Lewis of old. Or he will continue to struggle and then we'll obviously be saying his age really is a factor. He's clearly past his best and maybe it's time for him to hang up his helmet. But I've got to say that even if Ferrari built a competitive car next season that is capable of fighting for the World Championship, if you were to pick between Leclerc and Hamilton as to which driver you would back to be favourite to fight for the World Championship and win it, you would more than likely back Leclerc over Hamilton right at this moment, given that Charles currently clearly has the upper hand on Lewis. So it's possible that if the Ferrari is not good enough, or Lewis doesn't feel that he's performing to a certain level that is acceptable for both him and for the team, that he may decide, do you know what, now's the time for me to retire. And I don't think anyone would begrudge him from that. At the end of the day, his legacy is intact. He is, statistically, the greatest driver of all time. So there'll be no shame in him calling it a day, and I hope for his sake that he will make the decision, not Ferrari. I don't think I'll be alone in saying this, but it is really sad and painful to watch Lewis look a completely different person, a completely different driver to the one that he was. Seeing him lacking confidence, lacking self-belief, that's not the Lewis that we know and that we admire. It is really tough to see him struggling so much and looking so dejected and downbeat every time he has a difficult qualifying or a difficult race. It's never nice to see someone who has been so successful in the sport now looking as though they have overstayed their welcome. Some of the things that he does have on his side is that Lewis can take pride in the fact that he still has good race pace. His racecraft is still as good as it's ever been. You look at Spa, look at the way that he was able to read the conditions, made the switch to slicks, cut his way through the field and got up into the points. And more than that, one thing I would say also about Lewis is that I've never seen a driver in my time watching Formula One that is better at overcoming the odds, overcoming setbacks. The only problem is that this difficult period that Lewis is in, it may even be too big a step for him to overcome this time. Well guys, there you have it. That's it for today's video. Be sure to let me know your thoughts on today's topic in the comments section. Also, if you are new around here, don't forget to like the video and please do subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching guys, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.